Frustrated. A lot of people who are also frustrated are the business owners, those people that those unemployed workers used to work for. They have been applying for federal money through the PPP program, trying to get some small business administration loans. And here to talk to us this morning is Congressman Ed Case. He is fighting for Hawaii, and we so appreciate him being with us this morning. Good morning, Congressman. Thank you so much for being here.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me on.
So we know that the latest round of PPP funding was released on Monday. One of the big concerns with that, of course, was that the larger banks were able to bundle applications in groups of 15,000, as we understand. And if I say anything and I'm incorrect, please do correct me. My understanding is that it's 15,000 groups of 15,000. So the large banks on the mainland were really able to gobble up some of that money pretty quickly. What's your understanding in terms of how Hawaii businesses are faring in terms of getting their fair share?
Well, this is the second round of PPP funding. This is assistance from our federal government through the Small Business Administration to our small businesses. And of course, here in Hawaii, virtually all of our businesses are small businesses of one kind or another, as defined by the federal government, 500 or less. But the average number of employees per small business in Hawaii is quite low. It's about 12. And so we in the congressional delegation have been very, very concerned that we are able to compete fairly and equitably and get the assistance to our small businesses here in Hawaii who are in desperate need of this, just the same as anywhere else in the country. We did very, very well relatively on the first go around. That was the first $350 billion for this program that was in our CARES Act, one that was passed about a month ago. That was exhausted inside of 2 weeks. Through a lot of good work by a lot of folks here, we got about 11,000 loans processed for about $2 billion worth of aid to our small businesses. That is actually coming to Hawaii as we speak. We're now into round two, another $310 billion. Tremendous demand across the country. As you pointed out, that program opened up very early Monday morning, and we have been very, very concerned with the ability of our Hawaii small businesses and financial institutions to access that small business funding, again, equally for many, many different reasons. The concern was it's just been a really high level of concern. Yesterday, and I've really been spending virtually all of my time on making sure that PPP program is working for Hawaii in the last couple of days. Yesterday, Senator Schatz and I got on a phone personally with the head of the Small Business Administration, the administrator and her staff to relay our personal concerns for Hawaii on a number of fronts. And good news on that front is that the batching that you were talking about, where the larger businesses batched 15 and banks batched 15,000 applications at a time, they suspended that. Because yesterday at noon, because they felt, as we told them, that it was crowding out small businesses that were forced to apply individually throughout the country. They also gave us other bits of good news that Hawaii is actually making some pretty steady progress in this area. I think yesterday we already had yesterday morning, I think it was 1,500 plus applications approved. So we're on a pretty good trajectory, but again, the real challenge here is not so much the pace of the application, but the demand throughout the country, and that money is finite, at least for now. We might always renew it all over again, but it's really, really critical for us to continue the advocacy in Washington. Today, all 4 members of the delegation sent a joint letter to both Secretary Mnuchin of the Treasury and, again, the SBA administrator to cite very specific Hawaii challenges to accessing small business. And we're literally tracking it hourly to make sure that those applications are open, that our banks and credit unions can get in. Another encouraging thing that Secretary Mnuchin did this morning, I was on a phone call through my appropriations committee with him this morning. They felt that the folks that were especially getting crowded out were the banks with the very small banks and community financial institutions with net assets of $1 billion or less, which is actually a pretty small pretty small one. And so what they did was they actually restricted everybody else for some period of time to apply to give those smaller institutions a chance to have exclusive access. That's actually going on right now. It's just for today. And we got the word on that to our institutions here who fit into that category. So we're trying every trick in the book to maximize the amount that is coming to our Hawaii small businesses. It's an hourly effort. I think it's paying off. But we really won't know until we get down a week or so as to whether we actually were able to access very fairly and equitably across the board.
What happens, I mean, because there's no doubt that this money will also run out. Can we potentially see another round of support for those businesses? Because those who are passed in that, who maybe qualify for that first round of PPP, that gets them to the end of June. A lot of these businesses are saying, okay, then what? Because we might likely still be closed and unable to meet those sort of margins that they need. Could we see another round come out then?
Yes, we could. And as a matter of fact, as we speak, we in Congress are working on what we call CARES 2, which is to go back to the CARES package, which included the small business relief, and go for a third round of funding. The demand is so great, as you point out. That's not a whole bunch of time for small businesses to try to get back on their feet. Obviously, we need for them to be able to conduct business again. Otherwise, they'll have no sources of revenue. And we're trying very, very hard to do exactly what these bills are trying to do, which is to tide people through the real crisis point, both public health wise and economically, so that they can get back on their feet. This impacts some of our businesses, especially, for example, I've been talking with our restaurant industry, which is a critical part of our local economy, and the tourism industry in general also. And the problem there is, if you're asking them to commit that money, even if they get it, to employee protection for 8 weeks, and then expect them at the end of June to be back on their feet, social distancing restricts that to start with. And so I think we are definitely actively considering in Congress right now CARES 2, which would supplement small business again, and I hope extend that deadline. We also talked with Secretary Mnuchin this morning about that on our Appropriations Committee. So that's just one aspect of what we're working on right now. In CARES, in addition to small business, was, of course, the direct rebate payments to many Americans, and that's coming through a little slower than any of us wanted, but I estimate that about half of the folks in Hawaii now have those payments. Of course, unemployment insurance, that's been such an incredible challenge here in Hawaii. The federal supplementation is available right now. People are starting to get their plus up of $600 a week through the federal program. And then state and local governments, critical. We have already received here in Hawaii for the state and for the city and county of Honolulu $1.25 billion in direct assistance that they can access for a great variety of purposes. And both the state and the city and county are trying to figure out right now how best to spend that money. I think that will be supplemented also in our next CARES bill. And then finally, we're trying to help our hospitals and healthcare providers across our state and country. We funded them to about $100 billion in our first CARES bill, and we just went another $75 billion to them. And over and above that, added 25. Sorry about that. I've got a delivery guy coming.
Well, that's real life. I want to touch back on something that you just said, talking about the state budgets. We had the governor on here on Monday. Our understanding is that the money that comes from the federal government really can't be used to fund existing expenses. So those are things that were on the budget, before March 1st, I believe is when that time frame starts. So, we have Mitch McConnell suggesting that some states may actually go the route of bankruptcy. How do you see this sort of playing out with the federal government in terms of helping state budgets like ours? We're looking at a shortfall of, I believe it's around $1.5 billion. If we have no tax base because a third of our people aren't working, how do we navigate that, and how can the federal government help?
Well, two answers to you on that. The first answer is that 1.25 billion is actually available for quite a few range of state government and county government activities and needs. As long as you can demonstrate that the expenditure was forced as a result of COVID 19, you can spend that money, and I think that the state government is actively planning for expenditures of the 800 and some odd $1 million that it received, and I know that the county government, city and county, is doing the same. So whether it goes into this bucket or that bucket, it's still money into the overall state budget. That if it's allocated to some permissible purposes, it frees up some money possibly to go to other areas where it's not permissible, number one. Number two, in our upcoming CARES 2, which we're working on right now, there is no question whatsoever that front of mind for all of us is to create some more flexibility so that those monies can, in fact, be used to compensate for revenue shortfalls in previously budgeted areas. After all, the reason we have these revenue shortfalls is because of COVID-19. So the distinction of revenue shortfall in previously budgeted versus affirmative, obvious COVID-related, such as mobilizing the National Guard. I mean, it's kind of a meaningless distinction at that point. I hope that Mitch McConnell's perspective on this does not prevail. I think he's wrong, and I think, moreover, that he's got many Republican members of Congress who are in exactly the same boat back in their states and their counties. So I'm hopeful that in our next CARES 2 package, which is going to be another huge package to again help our country and our state through, that not only is that aid increase to state and counties, but they have the full range of flexibility to use that, and that'll help our state and county budget.
Another question I wanted to address is a question that actually came in a few days ago, and it was really concerning about just overall mortgage payments and people having a hard time both on the residential side and also businesses. So we've heard from small businesses who said that their landlords are saying, we're going to give you 3 months of rent free because they understand that you're not able to work, but expecting that 3 months of payment on the fourth month along with that month as well. So essentially 4 months of payment at one time. Is there anything that the federal government can do to maybe put a hold on some of these mortgage payments and put them on the back end of the loan to work with these agreements, so a lot of these businesses aren't forced to have to pay, you pay all this money that they may be getting in from the government just to go to pay and cover rent?
It's a really good point, and it's a major concern that comes into my office all the time. First of all, we have already done something about that. We actually required in our bills that we've passed to date actual suspension of both rental payments and mortgage payments for mortgages and rental properties that have a federal connection, are federally backed, whether it's supported by the federal mortgage protection programs or funded through federal housing requirements. And that's actually a lot of the rental and mortgages in Hawaii and elsewhere in the country. Now that's at present a forbearance, not a waiver. It's a forbearance. And so that does, again, beg the question of, well, what if they just, slide it for a couple of months and then ask for it in lump sum? First of all, I think that would be wrong to lump it into anybody right there at the end of the forbearance periods. Number two, as I recall, and I've had these discussions with our local banks very, very directly, they are generally rolling the foreign mortgage payments to the backside of the loan. So in other words, you don't owe it in a lump sum. They try to find a way to ease that over time. And I think many of the responsible lending institutions are doing the right thing along those lines. And then the final thing I would say on this is that if I was a renter and my landlord was saying that, first of all, are you connected with the federal government at all? Are you federal housing? Because you're not supposed to be doing that. And number two, I think we also have to realize that it's a chain reaction up the chain. I mean, many of these landlords have a mortgage, right? So in other words, if the landlord has gotten forbearance from their lender on their mortgage payments, pretty tough for the landlord to turn around and enforce a rent on the renter. So if I was a renter, I would say to the landlord, well, did you get a break on your side because you got a paycheck protection loan or a forbearance from your lender? I think those are legitimate questions for renters to ask. And then finally, what I would say is it is a complicated, it's a very complicated area, and it's critical to many families. And I think it's going to take a little more action at the federal level, which we are actively deliberating right now. What more reliefs do we give to renters and mortgagees? But there's a state component to this as well. The state has remedies that it can impose, and as you saw, Governor Ige did some of that by prohibiting any residential evictions, which I think was the right move. But we're going to have to sort through this over time. It's going to be difficult to unwind and get put back in the right way that kind of takes care of everybody's legitimate concerns and needs.
I want to make sure we bring in the audience, and there are a number of questions here. Kelly Vitorino says, the best idea to help us on rent and mortgage payments for us is to reopen the state now. We see a lot of push, not just here in Hawaii, but around the country. There's different groups who have different opinions on how fast we should get back to business. The president just announcing today that he is not going to extend the federal stay-at-home I don't know if you'd call it an order, but the suggestion that we all stay at home. But Governor Ige and Mayor Caldwell extending measures here in Hawaii till the 31st. What's your take on how soon things should open up and in what way?
I want things to reopen as fast as possible, as much as anybody in this country. The reality is that this is a public health epidemic and a crisis. And I think we have to apply a public health solution to it. And there's really no mystery about how you handle yourself going through a public health epidemic as we are right now. You need 5 stages. First of all, you need social distancing. The second is you need fully adequate and available testing so that people can determine whether they are in fact infected. Third, you need contact tracing to determine if the folks that came in contact with people that were tested are somehow in danger. Fourth, you need some form of containment of those folks so that the rest of the population can feel safe to engage again in a restaurant, in a bar, in a store. And then finally, you need completely adequate hospital capability and healthcare capability to handle it if it does get back out of control. And if we don't follow that pattern, if we don't walk ourselves systematically through that very deliberative process, the problem of opening up prematurely is not only do people get sick and die, but it damages your economy far more than had you deferred to get the public health side of it right to start with. So it's a very tough situation to be in. Here in Hawaii, the evidence is in. We've been one of the most successful in the entire across the entire country at really addressing the COVID-19 containment, and that has not been by accident. That's not some fluke of us being an island. We've done some pretty tough stuff here. But the consequence has been very severe to our economy, where we're one of the worst hit in the entire country. So what I think we have to do is, and I'm with respect to Kelly, I think it's very, very dangerous to open prematurely and we need to err on the side of caution here, because again, the consequence of not getting it right is going to be far worse than had we done it more deliberately. So I think they're on the right track. And what I can do during us getting through that right track at the federal level is to try as hard as I possibly can to ease the economic consequence and to bring people through that very deliberate period to where we can reasonably start to reopen.
We want to thank you for your time, and I know we're running out of time here. So just one maybe final thought. What would you suggest for those small business owners out there who are waiting for PPP, who haven't gotten word and maybe won't get in this round? Is there anything else that they can do? What other recommendations or advice that you would give from your level to those businesses that continue to struggle?
Well, I think I would say this. If you haven't applied already, go in and see your bank or your financial institution or your credit union right now. Yes, it's possible that you may not be able to get the assistance in this round. However, there were people that didn't get the assistance in the last round and came in and applied anyway, and they're now going to get the assistance. So that's the best thing that I can tell folks. If you don't have a relationship with a bank or a credit union, develop one right now. There are major resources out there to help answer your questions. to other assistance available. There are other programs and assistance available, federal and state and county for that matter levels. What we have is very good partners across the state, mainly affiliated with the Small Business Administration, such as the Small Business Development Centers, the Women's Business Development Centers, the Minority Business Development Centers, the Veterans Business Development Centers. These are pros that are available for this purpose, funded by the federal government to answer questions. And I think that they need to be accessed by anybody with questions. I'll leave you with this final thing, and that is that my office is open and completely available at all times to help anybody with your questions, with your needs. No request is too small. No question is not not relevant. We are literally answering thousands of questions from folks, so access my office. My website is case.house.gov. Case.house.gov. There's a whole bunch of COVID-19 information there, and front page on that I think is the contact information for the development centers that I talked about. Also my contact information. So please contact us, whether it's COVID-19 or otherwise. I am actually doing the rest of my job also, which I would have been doing in any event had COVID-19 come along. And so there are many areas that we're helping folks with non-COVID-19 related stuff like Social Security benefits or veterans benefits. But we're here to serve, and I appreciate the opportunity to share some of the thoughts and to invite people to contact your congressman.
All right, Congressman Ed Case, thank you so much. We'll actually put your web address in our show notes so that people watching this back can actually get access to your website. And we're going to be on here for a month more, so we'd love to get you back in a few weeks and maybe get an update, hopefully on maybe what could be another round of PPP payments and more ways that we can help to continue to support our businesses here. So thank you so much, Congressman Ed Case, for joining us here this morning.
Come back on. Maybe I'll come to you from DC the next time.
There we go.
Thank you so much.
Aloha.
Program.
Okay,
Talk
so you
story with legislators. We're very fortunate to have Congressman Ed Case, who represents the 1st District of Hawaii and in Congress in DC, and Representative Amy Peruso, who represents the House District 46, which is Mililani and Wahiawa. Greetings and mahalo to both of you for taking time to speak with us today.
Good afternoon. Aloha to everybody. Be with you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for being here. I know how your time must be very busy right now with everything that's going on, so we really appreciate that you've taken an hour out to speak with us. To give a little bit of background, the theme for today's talk came from reading several articles that noted parallels with our current situation and the Great Depression. The high unemployment of 20% led FDR to sign the executive order that created the Works Progress Administration on May 6, 1935. Hawaii's unemployment is now more than 37%, almost double of that in 1935. My first question is, would reviving a WPA be a possibility nationwide or at the state level? Congressman Case, would you like to take that?
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to express my appreciation for your setting this up and for including me in this really important subject and talk story. And it's great to join my state legislative colleague, Representative Peruso, who we share a portion of my district and her district together. So we represent people together, and obviously in this state, it doesn't really matter. We all represent the whole state. That's the way I look at it. So it's great to have partners in state and county government. I just thought I would just kind of overview this for everybody and then work back into your question a little bit about where we are on the federal level and how that might inform a better context to the answer to your question. So of course, we are somewhere in the range of 8 weeks into this incredible crisis, public health crisis, economic crisis, social safety net crisis. And of course, we have been particularly hard hit here in Hawaii with our reliance upon tourism and with the fact that we took some pretty severe measures in terms of social distancing, which have put us at the top of the country in terms of the control of the public health side of things, but at the bottom of the country in terms of the economic side of things. And I think we can all recognize that the fabric of our economy and social safety nets have been shaken, and it's going to be a tough climb back out of this. This is when government is the most crucial. Sometimes I hear people getting down on government, and I comment to them, well, I can't imagine climbing out of this puka without very strong collective assistance through our government, both at the federal, state, county levels. And so that's what we are doing up in Congress. We have now passed 4 emergency assistance funding pieces of legislation in the past 8 weeks. The total bill for that is $2.5 trillion. These are allocated really to all parts of our communities and societies. We've tried to help out state and county governments with their needs. We've definitely tried to help out our healthcare and hospitals and healthcare providers and across the state with major funding, especially in the personal protective equipment area. We've certainly tried to help our businesses, small businesses and larger businesses, but here in Hawaii, mostly small businesses, since 96% plus are small businesses here in Hawaii. As I think everybody knows at this point, when we talk about aid to our small businesses, we are considering a broader definition of small business, so to include some nonprofits, to include independent contractors, sole proprietors. And then we have also tried to provide over on the unemployment insurance and benefits side for those that have lost their jobs or have been significantly downsized. And we have also set up direct economic impact payments to most Americans, and those are all in the pipeline in some way, shape, or form. Here in Hawaii, we probably have somewhere in the range of $4.5 billion that's come in various ways, shapes, and forms, and billions more to come in if we do the right things up at the federal level and try to track that money all the way down through. And that's aside from the aid, of course, that the state and county governments are trying to provide as well. So all of that is, I think, good, but completely insufficient for what we're going to need to actually tide ourselves all the way through this. And so we are very actively working right now in Congress on what we call CARES 2, because the major bill of the 4 bills was and is referred to the CARES Act, and that's a little over 4 weeks old now, or a month old more accurately. And that was the biggest of the bills. That was close to $2 trillion. That set up many of the programs that we're trying to implement right now. And we are working now in Congress on CARES 2, which is to the point of, well, okay, fine, we've done all of this. Now, what is working? What is not working? Where are the gaps? Where are the needs? What has not turned out to be the case that we thought 5 or 7 or 8 weeks ago? And where do we just simply need to fund more? And so I probably will go back to Washington the week after next to vote on CARES 2. And we're trying to get that out. None of us think that that's going to be enough either. So we definitely do believe that even with a CARES 2 package, the needs are going to be so significant going down the road. That funding so far has also included emergency assistance funding to the arts and the humanities through the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities. We've just started actually to see the humanities money is actually flowing through to Hawaii right now. We are starting to see that here and available for grants administered for the most part through the state humanities programs. And then in the National Endowment for the Arts funding, which was about $75 million coming out of the CARES Act, about 60% of that is direct grants to organizations, and the grant window is open for that. So if anybody is interested in that, I hope that information has gotten to you. And if not, we can provide it. The other 40% is earmarked right through the state arts agencies. And we've just heard that the State Foundation on Culture and the Arts has decided to fund it to organizations who have received grants already from the State Foundation. And so I would encourage you to talk to the state foundation about that. Both the overall policy of restricting that to recent recipients, but also to the amounts and how that money is going to be distributed. There is some other grant money coming out of that pot from the Western States Arts Federation, which is also available. So there's areas to help our folks that contribute so much in the arts and the humanities. In addition, of course, to the small business entities that have applied for and received funding from the small business programs, including some of our nonprofits in the arts and the humanities who have already done that. So that money is also available. Now, that's a long way of getting to the answer to your question, but I wanted to get that out to the folks that are listening in. We have definitely considered, there is no question that we all feel the weight of the Great Recession and the New Deal, and are looking to a lot of the answers there in terms of how we actually got ourselves out of that puka, which to date at least is deeper than this one, but this one may well be the equivalent at the end of the day. And we have definitely worked at Works Progress administration approaches, Civilian Conservation Corps, a number of other areas in which the federal government at the time got people back to work through programs like this throughout the country that, of course, are with us to this day, and the art that's in our buildings. And lots of times people forget that a lot of the infrastructure of Hawaii actually, bridges and scenic lookouts and lots of stuff was from the CCC days. So there's lots of very instructive, lots of our trails. There's lots of very instructive lessons there, and we're clearly looking at that. And as a part of the next sequence of bills, which is, okay, we have to, first of all, get through kind of survival and stability. We've got to get to some form of stability. That takes immediate funding to existing businesses, existing programs. This is the fastest way to get that money into our communities. But then, okay, fine. At the end of the day, let's say we're down 2 to 3 months from now, and we're obviously not recovering anywhere close to what would be quote unquote normal 12 weeks ago. How can we actually get people back to work who simply cannot get to work because they don't have work, because our businesses are not open, because our governments cannot afford to hire up anymore? And I think that we've thought about that in a couple of different ways. We've definitely thought about that from the perspective of a very, very large infrastructure bill, in which we would fund a federal mechanism to jumpstart infrastructure across our country. So, our airports and our bridges and the hardcore infrastructure that in many cases, and we know this here in Hawaii, has not been maintained adequately and it really needs it. And then we've also thought from the perspective of, okay, well, that's construction, but what about the broader community? What about the community of artists and musicians and folks that work in the arts and the humanities? Can we go back to a WP style program? We've all seen the great photographs, for example, of from that era. I remember them in my mind's eye right now, and can we do that? And so it's very active. It's a very active discussion in Congress right now. I don't know where it's going to end up, but it's clearly on the radar screen.
That's awesome. I mean, it's good news. It's good news to hear that that Congress is definitely thinking along those lines again. Even in Hawaii, we've got examples of murals that were made by Jean Charlot, who had been a commissioned artist in New York City in 1935. So we have ties to that tradition, which are still visible.
So one thing that Hawaii continues to be revolutionary on is the state arts program, under which the procurement monies are set aside to support the arts and culture in Hawaii. And obviously, a kind of a go-to thing for any government under these circumstances would be to try to jumpstart those shovel-ready projects and keep people at work. And I would very much hope that in the discussions in the state legislature, they're not thinking about suspending that that set aside, because that set aside has been really invaluable to the arts in Hawaii. And like I said earlier, I mean, there's hardly any places like that in our entire country that are doing it. We've been doing it for a couple of decades. Has that been?
Could you talk more about what other bills you hope to propose or initiate that would have a positive impact on the creative sector, not only in Hawaii but nationwide?
Well, I mean, we have a. I think the best answer I can give you on that is that we have a pretty well developed program to support the arts and the humanities across our country that's been in place for a long time. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that program. The fact that the federal government has it is a testament to the value placed by people that were in Congress long before I even got close to the place on the arts and the humanities. And so the structure, the national endowments, which Congress funds to a great deal of money every year, there's nothing wrong with that. That money does flow down. That money does support the arts and culture and humanities here in Hawaii on a rolling, existing year-to-year basis. I know that in my own work on the Appropriations Committee in the House, we try very hard to protect and enhance that funding because it's of great value. So I guess the way I would try to answer you is to say I'm not necessarily, other than for the possibility of a WPA CCC style approach to recovery, I'm not really looking necessarily for brand new programs, but I'm definitely looking to maintain and expand existing programs, not only for the intended value, which was always to foster and preserve our uniqueness across the country and in all parts of the country, but it was also, and it's clearly recognized today as a way to support the community economically. So my first go-to would be to make sure that those programs are not shortchanged, and that this is viewed as an opportunity to expand them because they have value on a number of fronts. So I can't say that I've got any bright ideas, or that I'm aware of any bright ideas to go in a different direction on all of that. I suppose one idea would be some kind of a federal procurement set aside modeled on Hawaii, but I think that would take a long time to get that into play. I think people would far more be likely to continue and expand funding to existing programs even after the emergency itself is over, and to consider a WPA style program, which is there's already a model for. So those are some comments along those lines.
Sure. So we'll start off the discussion talking about small businesses. Congressman, thank you for joining us. And feel free to chime in, Reps Okimoto and DeCoit. Congressman, what's your assessment of how Hawaii small businesses are doing, and all of the work that you've been doing in DC before you came back? First of all, I just want to say aloha to everybody watching, and a special mahalo to Rep Okimoto for inviting me on, and Rep DeCoit. It's good to see you again. Of course, I have the great honor of representing the 1st Congressional in the United States Congress, which goes all the way from Makapu'u all the way to the top of Mililani, right on the border of Wahiawa, and then down all the way to Po'olina. So I definitely, Representative Okimoto and I share about 25,000 or 30,000 or so constituents together. And I'm very, very proud of doing that. Rep Okimoto has come to my talk story at town halls, and I've tried to include her wherever I can. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk story with her constituents and with everybody else that's watching. And then Rep DeCoit, as you know, I had the great honor of representing the 2nd Congressional from 2002 to 2007, including all of your district. And I miss it. I miss representing the 2nd. I love representing the 1st Congressional, but I also miss representing the 2nd Congressional. And of course, as you both know, when it comes to representing Hawaii in Congress, we really don't pay a whole bunch of attention to district lines. So I'm sure that Representative Gabbard would feel this way too, and I just feel like I'm an at-large representative for the whole state, and so it's good to be with you both. So let me lay a little bit of groundwork. We have now passed in Congress 4 emergency assistance funding bills in the last 8 weeks,
These bills total almost $2.5 trillion in emergency assistance to our country. We started in early March. We passed another one in mid-March. We passed what's called the CARES Act just about 4 weeks ago. And then 1 week ago, I was in Congress in Washington, D.C., and we voted on the fourth of those bills. And these have been intended to exactly what I just said, emergency assistance for our country to try to deal with, number one, the public health crisis that is facing our country, the need for personal protective equipment for folks to be able to handle the crisis itself from a public health perspective. And then, of course, we've had the devastation from an economic and social safety net perspective as well. And the aid that we have funded has come in a couple of different buckets, which I'll just list really briefly and then come back to your question. One, we funded monies to state and local governments. About $1.25 billion has already come to the state of Hawaii and to the city and county of Honolulu. We also funded about $800 trillion for in the first go around for businesses, about 500 for mid-size or larger businesses, and about 350 billion for small businesses. We also funded the small business program another 310 billion last Thursday, so that's $660 billion straight to small businesses. We also funded a federal supplement for unemployment insurance, and that's, of course, been a tremendous issue here in Hawaii, where we have had the highest unemployment growth pro rata in the entire country. And, of course, we've had major difficulties in terms of getting the unemployment benefits to people that really need it at the state level, which is where that's administered. We've tried to send a lot of money to our healthcare systems, and Rep. DeCoy, this is particularly important for you because we have tried to get that money to the continuum of healthcare right across the entire state. So, for example, I was on the phone the other day with the Molokai and Mana'i health centers, which is where so much of that healthcare is delivered in the non-urban Honolulu area, to try to make sure that they were covered. And then finally, the direct payments or the economic impact payments, the $1,200 per person, $2,400 per couple to many, many people across the country, most Americans, about 80% of Americans are eligible for that. So back to small business, that's been a major issue for me and for all of us in the delegation, because here in Hawaii, almost all of our businesses are small businesses. We've had two major programs. One is called the Paycheck Protection Program, PPP, and that tries to get loans to small businesses to keep people on the payroll. The other one is called the Economic Injury Disaster Impact Program, the so-called EIDL loan program. In all honesty, that is a good program, but it hasn't been administered quite as quickly and fast as the PPP. We are right in the middle of another round of PPP applications, so this is a very, very critical week for Hawaii. The first go around, we got about 11,000 small businesses funded to the tune of about $2 billion. So that was a pretty good result the first time, but it wasn't anywhere close to what the need was. And so frankly, I've been spending almost all of this week trying to make sure that PPP program can get out there to Hawaii small businesses and get to the folks that really need it.
Congressman,
And Congress-
oh, sorry. I just wanted to.
No, Rep, go ahead.
So we just want to thank you for at the federal level doing whatever you can to help the small businesses. And I think Rep. DeCoy and I have been pretty vocal in the legislature. Rep. DeCoy is a local business owner, and I've been pretty vocal about supporting our local businesses. So I want to thank you for whatever you're doing. Do you have any other suggestions or counsel or advice for people like Rep. DeCoy, who is a local business owner, as we go through and as we move forward from this point on? You say we went through the phase 2, is that correct? And maybe Rep. DeCoy, you can chime in to how this has affected you and your business also.
So first of all, I wanted to thank Congressman Case. You nailed it all. First go around, people just slammed in there, and I gotta give you a big shout out, because the second go around really allowed those that just completely couldn't even get in, almost like the unemployment here, what we're dealing with at the state level. But, it said a lot when you folks did the second dropping of those fundings for the PPP. Payroll is a big thing, as you know, and you served our district very well at some point in time. And I remember even when we used to have the Business Expo in Molokai, you came, you saw, you were a big supporter We've lost a lot of that. And as you know, we've had our challenges on Molokai as well as on Lanai. So the PPP is really huge here. Yesterday, at one point, I got word from Pulama that they were going to shut down that place completely for everybody. And today, Larry Ellison turned around and said, I'm going to keep them to May 30th, which was a load off of our mind because I could just imagine the inundation of the UI system here in Honolulu. But, you've done a lot. Our congressional delegation has fought tooth and nail. We tip our hat to you because, businesses that would normally be drowning right now has actually had that as a life savior. Where Okimoto has always fought on the floor as hard. And, as many people would say, Lynn, what are you doing working with the Republicans? It doesn't matter. And I know you're the same way, Congressman Case. If it's right, it's right. If it's wrong, we'll deal with it and go from there. But I got to thank you because it's kept a lot of the businesses here still afloat. And that extra has helped the UIs and so forth, and the extra stimulus that what you guys have done also. That extra $600 a month has carried many well. The UI system has been inundated. At the same time, Senate side has put in 36 of their people there. And for the rest of everybody to know that they have slammed through a lot of those claims. I had some of the guys on Molokai put in a week ago and are receiving UI checks as well as the stimulus added. So thank you. Thank you for that, Congressman. And of course, Rep. Okimoto, you've always been stellar when it comes to stuff about business in your district.
Yeah, and as a freshman legislator, it was a little daunting, right, Rep. DeCory? I would stand up and think, oh man. But I've always fought because I'm a local kid. I grew up on the neighbor islands. I fight for what I think is right. And you're right. I love that I can work with people. It doesn't matter which party we belong to, really. When it comes to the issues that protect and provide for our people, that's what gets me, motivated each and every day. So I appreciate you guys working with me on this.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In terms of your initial question on how to help further with small businesses, the main thing I would say is just keep on trying to access the Small Business Administration loans. That's really the most immediate, and it's been frustrating. Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. The demand for these programs across the entire country and here in Hawaii has just been immense. And for those of you that know the Small Business Administration and their loan programs, they're not used to this at all. This is not a large federal agency, and yet we've asked them to handle one of the largest and most important jobs in the federal government on a very short time window. They have made more small business loans in the last couple of weeks than they did in the previous 20 years. And so that'll tell you some magnitude of what we're asking of them. And it has been very, very much a problem. And we have all tried to work with the Small Business Administration as well as our local banks and credit unions and community financial institutions to make sure that the maximum number of small businesses can actually apply and get approved and get funded. So like I said, we got about 11,000 the first time around, but when we closed that funding down, well, we didn't close it down, it got exhausted. That $350 billion went in 2 weeks. In Hawaii at the time, there were another 11,000 over and above the 11,000 that got applied, that got approved, already waiting in line. And so this time around, of course, those 11,000 are still waiting in line, and we're fighting to try to get them funded. But there's a whole bunch of people that just didn't get the word or weren't able to pull together those kind of paperwork or relationship with a lender. And those are the ones that I'm really kind of worried about the most, is the folks that maybe they don't have an established relationship with a lender. Maybe they don't. Maybe they operate on a really kind of on the edge, and so their ability to get a loan to start with is maybe a little bit lower, and then they just not used to going through the process of applying for the loans and gaining them, and so there's a whole segment of our community here that I think is really exposed still, and those are the folks that I worry about everybody, but I really worry about maybe some of those folks that don't have that access. And so what we're trying to tell people for that is, please, if you are a small business, and by the way, when we're talking about a small business, it also includes an independent contractor. So in other words, it's just you in the business, a sole proprietor, single person LLC. These folks are eligible just like, a 500 employee small business for this aid. And so what the federal government helps to fund throughout the state are resources for small businesses to contact for help. So these are the small business development centers. If you are a minority business, which many are in Hawaii, the minority business development centers. If you're a woman-owned business, we have the Women Business Development Center. If you're a veteran-owned business, we have Veteran Business Development Centers. And these are folks that are there to kind of cut through this all for you. So if you don't have that existing access, that existing relationship, that existing knowledge of how to go about applying for a small business loan, these folks are there to help you. And I will reference my website right now at case.house.gov, case.house.gov. Right on the front page is a link to a bunch of COVID-19 related stuff, including these small business programs. And right there on that front page are these development center contact information. So I would encourage anybody out there who is in this situation of a small business struggling to stay alive and needing needing a lifeline to go to that, call those folks and see whether you can get yourself in line for a small business loan, which becomes a grant, by the way. So a loan can convert into an outright grant as long as you keep people on your payroll for a certain period of time. So this is about payroll protection. And so the reason that we are giving this money to small business is not so you can use it on your own salaries, and that it's conditional on keeping people on the payroll and off the unemployment side of things.
That's good. I want to quickly thank those, when we publicize this, we ask for any questions to come our way. So I want to thank those who submitted questions or topics. I'm going to quickly turn some time over to Kaeo. Maybe he can kind of share with us some of those insights or questions that were brought to our attention that you wanted, as the public wanted addressed tonight.
Sure. I think one thing that a lot of folks have been wondering, especially here in Hawaii with our housing costs and everything, what are some of the federal protections on mortgages and for renters?
So in the CARES Act, we actually did try to address these critical issues for many people. And what we basically said was that first of all, we set up suspension of mortgage payments of 180 days, up to 180 days, if your mortgage is federally backed. And that means that the federal government, essentially what that means is the federal government is guaranteeing the mortgage to the lender. And many mortgages throughout Hawaii are federally backed. About 70% nationally are federally backed. So that's a mandate to those lenders that they must give you forbearance on your payments. And we also set up a no foreclosure in those situations. Also, in terms of rent, we did something similar to that for federally backed housing, rental housing. And there's a fair bit of that in Hawaii, not quite as much as the mortgages. So there is definitely relief in the bills that we've passed already on the federal level. But I'll tell you in the same breath that at the federal level, we can't reach it all. There's not a blanket prohibition on any requirement of payment for a certain period of time across the board. The federal government touched the programs and the housing that it had a direct involvement in, but there's a lot that the state can do along these lines. And as everybody knows, that the governor also has a lot of executive power, and he has invoked some of that power by basically saying you can't evict anybody from their home for a certain period of time. So the solution to this is partly in the federal government, partly at the state level, and the representatives can speak to that. But also it's just at the level of your landlord or your lender. Pretty tough in the situation for a renter to go to a landlord and say, look, I can't pay your rent, and for the landlord to come down hard on the renter in that situation. I mean, I think that's wrong. And I think many, if not most of our lenders, commercial lenders out there, are actively deferring mortgage payments during this period. And that's the right thing to do. And they're also getting a break also, by the way, because they're eligible for some of this aid. So it would be upsetting to me if a renter went to a landlord and said, can you defer my rent? And the landlord said no, but yet the landlord was getting assistance So kind of, having its cake and eating it too, that would be quite wrong. And similarly with the lenders. And so if a renter or a borrower is in that situation, one thing I would say to the lender and landlord is, well, are you getting a break from the federal government yourself? Because you should pass that through me. First of all, again, thank you for letting me come on with you and asking me to join you. It's an honor to serve our constituents with both of you. Partnerships like this are just invaluable. I just think it's so important for me as up in Congress to stay in touch with my state and local counterparts, and you guys are a lot closer to, in many cases, the communities on a day-to-day basis than I am. So I really rely on that, number one. Number two, I guess I just would like to again say to everybody that my office is completely open. My staff and I are here to serve, and we are serving thousands of people. And so if you feel you need help, you're not alone. There's thousands of people like you that have already been through my office virtual doors at this point. And so again, my website is case.house.gov, and I thank you again for the opportunity to be on and talk story with the folks that are watching.
Thank